So another week has passed since we last visited, and welcome to North Star Oasis. I'm your host, Jeff Williams. You're watching us live on Suburban Community Channels, Channel 15, and St. Paul. If you're in St. Paul area, you're also watching us live. And for those of you who are watching us live, because there are some who do watch this at different time slots and watch it pre-recorded, I have a couple of events that are coming up. First of all, we have a Civil War homecoming, view from Minnesota on the war and its aftermath. The year 1865 saw inauguration, abolition, armistice, assassination, grief, celebration, and reunion. The brand new frontier state of Minnesota mourned and commemorated along with the rest of the nation. Minnesotans celebrated the return of the troops and got down to the business of building railroads and cities, sprinkling the countryside with farms and lumber camps and welcoming immigrants by the tens of thousands. Dan Schoenard and an all-star group of friends gathered to paint a Minnesota portrait of the times through songs, letters, and newspaper accounts in Civil War Homecoming. This live show at the Fitzgerald Theater tonight is a co-production of the Minnesota Historical Society, Minnesota Public Radio, and the Minnesota Civil War Commemoration Task Force. Featuring Kevin Kling, Maria Jett, T. Michael Rambo, Prudence Johnson, members of the Royal Family Singers, and the Brass Messengers, as well as Eric Jacobson, Annette Atkins, Gwen Westerman, Mark Ritchie, Dean Erdahl, Pat Bauer, and David Geister. It is directed by Craig Johnson. That is tonight at the Fitzgerald Theater in St. Paul. And once we pack up the studio after today's show, I will be heading down to the Fitzgerald Theater for that production. And again, if you're one of our live viewers, I encourage you to join us. There are still tickets available. You can go to mncivilwar150.com or go to the Fitzgerald Theater website. You'll probably have to Google that. But that show is at 7 o'clock tonight. And if you by chance can't make it down tonight, Minnesota Public Radio will be broadcasting that, I believe, at, I think I've actually got it here, Wednesday, April 15th, the 150th anniversary of President Abraham Lincoln's assassination. That show will be airing on the radio on NPR at noon and at 9 p.m. But that is actually going on live tonight, and you are welcome to come on down and join. Another thing that we've talked about in the past is the circus and the Osmond Circus. The Osmond Shrine Circus is still being held tonight, 7:30 p.m., 1 p.m., and 5:30 p.m. tomorrow. Go to osmondcircus.com, and I'm actually going to try to show up for tomorrow, one of tomorrow's performances, all schedule permitting, for me, of course. But in the meantime, for the next 56 minutes. Sit back and enjoy the show. We're going to actually focus tonight on the topic of war and remembrance. No, we're not covering Hillary Clinton's emails. That's been done. We're not covering Benjamin Netanyahu's speech in front of Congress. That's been done. We're not covering his re-election. But I do want to remind you that there are 271 shopping days left until Christmas. And our staff is getting happy as they think about what kind of technological gizmos I'm going to provide them for Christmas this year. And I'll tell you this, guys, it is a secret. It is so secret that I don't even know what I'm going to be getting you for Christmas presents, but I know that I have 271 shopping days left to figure it out. But for those who are in tune to politics, I will remind you that we have 94 weeks, 5 days, and 20 hours until the next presidential inauguration on January 20th, 2017. So that's my political feature for tonight, because right now we're going to show, this has been an interesting week. March 26th, Thursday in particular. March 26th, we had a press conference with Governor Mark Dayton on behalf of the Civil War Commemoration Task Force, on which I serve, and that's highlighting an event that's coming up on April 9th, a nationwide bell ringing. And actually, Minnesota is one of those states that's taking the lead on this. So we're going to bring you that. But then March 26th also was the 70th anniversary of the ending of the Marine Corps involvement with the Iwo Jima campaign, and that coincides with the reunion of honor commemorations that actually occurred on the island. So right now we're going to bring you a clip from the press conference on Thursday with Governor Mark Dayton and other distinguished guests and members of the Minnesota Civil War Commemoration Task Force.
Thank you. I have no further remarks. That says it all. I was just imagining that sound as they went into battle of the first Minnesota, of course, being so critical of the Civil War, but in the Battle of Gettysburg. But there are over 600 Minnesotans who lost their lives in the service during the Civil War and the battles themselves, and I'm told over 1,800 other Minnesotans who lost their lives and through disease or injuries suffered in those combat situations. So almost 2,500 Minnesotans, one of you can correct me, has better information, gave their lives, preserve our nation, and many of them, of course, the state, Minnesota only recently become a state, so many of them literally had not even become American citizens, and many of them did not even speak the English language when they volunteered to serve our country and save our country. And so it's a special moment to commemorate the fact that 150 years from now, on April 9th, this terrible war came to a conclusion, and that we've been fortunately saving the nation and salving the wounds of that disaster ever since. So I think it's given Minnesota's a prominent role, given the importance of our soldiers and the sacrifices they made. And it's very fitting we commemorate with the proclamation and the events that are going to go on April 9th. And of course, I'm always reminded that, since one of my political heroes was Abraham Lincoln, that 5 days later he went to the plague and never really had a chance to live and witness the aftermath of this nation that he kept together and brought through this terrible conflict. So it's very appropriate that we have this event. It's my honor to read this proclamation, issue this proclamation. I'm not going to read it because I can't see it. And because it's empty, but it is my honor as Governor of Minnesota to commemorate April 9th, 2015 as Minnesota Commemoration Day of the end of the American Civil War. And I paused there because I was looking to see where's Mark Ritchie? I was looking there to see whose signature was on this. I said, this is a fake one.
It's a new young man.
Yeah, okay. So, sir?
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. All right.
And one of the prime movers in all of this commemoration is somebody who's the author of, was it 4 books? Or is Representative Earl? Eight books. 8 books and counting. Well, eventually it'll get up to when I was born. But certainly somebody who's really spearheaded this effort to give it the proper commemoration from the beginning of the Civil War. So Representative Earl, welcome.
Thank you.
I would like to thank the governor for his support of the efforts of our Civil War Sesquicentennial Task Force over the last 4 years. It's been an honor to serve as co-chair with Secretary Ritchie and to help to observe the glories and the despair and all of the events that happened 150 years ago. Minnesota, of course, had a tremendous part in that war, and we hear about what the first Minnesota did at Gettysburg, which truly was an amazing event, but also in Tennessee and Kentucky and other places where most Minnesotans fought, they also achieved much glory. Battles have long been ringing in our country for many reasons. They commemorate birth, death, joy, sadness, alarm, and warning. They sounded in April of 1865, at least in the North, when the war ended, to joyously proclaim the end of this tragic conflict. And may they ring again, may they peal again on April 9th, 2015, to remember what happened 150 years ago. Because by remembering, we gain knowledge, we learn, and learning, of course, going into the future is so important to us in terms of not repeating the mistakes of the past. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Senator Roger Reinert and have had the pleasure to be involved with the Civil War Task Force as well. I do also want to thank the Governor for your support, Secretary Richard for your passion around this issue, and I think we would be remiss not to recognize Representative Erdahl's both passion and leadership throughout the course of this. I've written no books at this point, but I do teach civics and government, and one of my favorite things is to bring my students down to the state capitol during the fall semester. And on the trip down, I always try to instill in them some sense of history and pride in Minnesota. I have always been proud that Minnesota was the first state to defend the Union in the Civil War, and most of my students don't know that. And I always share with them a blog that I came across a few years ago titled July 2nd, A Great Day to Thank Minnesota for Saving the Union. And of course, it's the story of the first Minnesota on that fateful day at the Battle of Gettysburg. And I think a personal highlight for me was our trip 2 summers ago to the Battle of Gettysburg to honor that 150th anniversary. And I will never forget the image of us walking the steps of those men from the 1st Minnesota, meeting the volunteers that day from Alabama, and General Nash, you're exchanging with the Adjutant General from Alabama some gifts and tokens from the 2 states, and sort of recognizing, as deep sometimes as we think our divides are, I can't quite imagine anything quite as deep as that, and we were able to recover as a country and move forward. So, you know, as someone who wears the uniform and serves in the United States Navy Reserve as a citizen sailor, I feel especially proud of these Minnesotans who were citizen soldiers at that time. And I would just leave you with one suggestion. If you have not done so, you really ought to read the book, The Last Full Measure, by Duluthian Richard Moe, who tells the story of the 1st Minnesota, and tells it from folks who were essentially embedded reporters, like Don Davis at that time. And Don was not there. Don was not there. I'm sorry. Reporters like Don Davis who were embedded at the time with the 1st Minnesota and sending home from the battle line unedited notes and stories of that experience. And it is a quick read and is pretty powerful. So thank you all for being here to help us recognize the contributions of our Minnesotans 150 years ago.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Major General Rick Nash, the Adjutant General for the state of Minnesota. Governor Dayton, thanks for your establishment of the Civil War Task Force, your support and your vision for this very important endeavor. And Representative Erdahl and former Secretary Ritchie, two of our co-chairs, and better ones we could not have had. Both are very passionate and were extremely successful in bringing awareness to Minnesotans and our contributions in our nation's history. And this was a bipartisan leadership team, Governor Dayton, one Northerner, and one individual born in Georgia. But it's certainly an honor to join all of you here today to encourage Minnesotans to participate in Bells Across the Land, the event that's going to be held on April 9th. And it's certainly been a distinct honor also and a privilege to be involved with the Civil War Commemoration Task Force during these last 5 years. And I also want to personally thank Randall, Steve Elliott, who's standing behind me, Andrea Kyer, Dave Kelhar, and their staffs from the History Center for their efforts, for the programs that they've produced, and the documentaries over the last 4 years, bringing education and awareness to all Minnesotans. So thank you very much for doing that. But it also reminds me of the deep ties, not only to our state, which we have to the Civil War, but also to the men and women of the Minnesota National Guard. You know, when the Civil War broke out in 1861, volunteers from Minnesota's militia formed a nucleus for the first 3 companies of the 1st Minnesota that was referenced earlier. Both sides in that war had to rely upon volunteer regiments, battalions, and separate companies recruited by all the states. The 1st Minnesota, though, is officially recognized as the senior such regiment in the Union Army because Alexander Ramsey was visiting Washington, D.C. at the time when President Lincoln called for federal troops. And even today, our governor is still providing support to our president with our forces around the globe. And that regiment went on to serve with distinction in the Army of the Potomac and became a legend as a result of its service and its gallant charge at Gettysburg on July 2nd, 1863, which many of us in this room commemorated in 2013 with a visit to that battlefield and engaged with our opponents that day, the legacy from the Alabama regiments and the Adjutant General Perry Smith, 150 years later, on the same day, at the same time, on the same ground. And Minnesota then eventually organized and recruited volunteers for 11 infantry regiments to fight in the Civil War, 2 cavalry regiments, a heavy artillery regiment, 3 light artillery batteries, and 2 sharpshooter companies, totaling 22,000 soldiers from a young Minnesota in a developing state. And that's quite a high percentage of young men fighting in the Civil War. And many of these service members also served in our frontier, as many of the books that Representative Erdahl has written about. In fact, hastily organized local militia and detached companies from several of our volunteer regiments were the only line of defense during Minnesota's Dakota War of 1862. After the Civil War, the Minnesota militia re-emerged and became officially the Minnesota National Guard. And I know that on April 9th, I will be personally reflecting on the service and sacrifice of those Minnesotans who gave of themselves to bring an end to the war at the Appomattox Courthouse 150 years ago. You know, a point of history that I'll leave you with. The ending of that conflict took place when Generals Grant and Lee met in the parlor of a house owned by Wilmer McLean. Mr. McLean had moved from Manassas, as many of you may recall, was the first Battle of Bull Run. And he moved to get away from the fighting that he could see coming. And how poetic that 4 years after the war came to an end, in his home, some quipped that the Civil War had started in McLean's front yard and ended on his front parlor. So thanks to all of you for what each of you have contributed to the Governor's Civil War Task Force over the last 4 years. Thank you very much.
This commemorative task force has had the extraordinary opportunity to bring forth to the people of Minnesota ways that we're still connected today. I remember the ceremony on the way of sending our reenactors off to Antietam, where Governor Quee, whose grandfather had been severely wounded at the Battle of Antietam. Guess we're lucky he was wounded, because most of his other soldiers he had been there with did not come home from that war. But we could see a direct connection. Some of us are old enough to have been alive when our Minnesotan, who was the last of the Union soldiers, died in our lifetime. So we know we are still connected in some ways, and the task force has given us a chance to share that with so many of the other Minnesotans. But what's important about this last period is that we're now beginning to talk about the homecoming. This Saturday night at Fitzgerald Theater at 7 o'clock, there'll be a wonderful program with Minnesota Public Radio, some of our finest artists, some of us here today. We'll be looking at the homecoming, and why perhaps this is so important is that even in our life here today in Minnesota, General Nash referenced the 22,000 or more who came home from the Civil War. We have over 20,000, maybe 28,000 who've been deployed and are home or coming home from the wars that we've been engaged in and the conflicts around the planet. The homecoming that they had to understand and absorb and lead in that time 150 years ago. We are in that period here today, and it's something that all of us here in the task force and others who've joined us, and many of our citizens and our legislative and administrative and executive branch leaders are focused on as well. So we look into the past to give us some insights into the present, but we've had this chance. Now we will see how we do of taking those lessons and making sure that the homecomings going on now bring us back our young leaders, our men and women who put their lives at risk for all of us, their homecoming needs to be as healing and forward-moving as the homecomings of those soldiers 150 years ago who built this great state and left it to us as a gift, but they wanted us to make sure that we took great care of it. Thank you again for being here this morning.
Hi, my name's John Amphitson. I'm the superintendent of the Mississippi National River and Recreation Area, a unit of the National Park Service here in the Twin Cities. And on Tuesday night, I sent an email to the program lead for our Civil War to Civil Rights effort in Washington, D.C. And when she saw what I said, she said, other state capitals have agreed to ring their bells on April 9th, but no state has stood up like the state of Minnesota has with Governor Dayton and Representative Erdahl to take the lead on this initiative. So again, like in 1861, Minnesota is leading. As the agency that preserves the places and stories central to the American narrative, Antietam, Gettysburg, and Appomattox Courthouse, we are honored to be here today. On Thursday, April 9th, Minnesota's bells will ring along with the Liberty Bell, the Old North Church Bell of Paul Revere fame, and the bell in the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, where Martin Luther King was baptized and where his funeral was held. The bells will not only commemorate an important event in the past, but we must remember they also mark that civil rights is something we can never stop pursuing. Thanks.
My name is Ann Svenningson. I'm the Bishop of the Minneapolis Area Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church, and I am also honored to be here today, and especially to invite all communities of faith to ring their church bells on April 9th in observance of this 150th anniversary of the end of the Civil War. Our bells ring out clearly to signal our deep gratitude for our country's vision and courage to move from slavery to emancipation, and in gratitude for the enormous sacrifices that led us from war and division to a peace that would reunite and essentially save this democracy less than a century old. We also ring out our bells to signify our resolve that we who stand on the shoulders of these women and men will now have vision and courage in our own time to move beyond division, even polarization, and to make the sacrifices needed for the sake of freedom and justice, and work together for the good of all and for unity in this precious gift that we call democracy. Thank you.
Respond to questions on this topic?
Will there be a central ceremony for like one main Minnesota?
Is there a central ceremony?
The central ceremony for,
On the 9th that we're,
nothing planned on the 9th that I know of.
Representative Bergdahl, would you describe for us, having studied this so long, what it was like in Minnesota that day when the war ended? Was it despair? Was it joy? Was it expectation? Tell us what it was like then.
You know, I don't know how specific I can be on that particular day.
How about the end of the war?
Well, as the different regiments came home, you know, there were parades, there were community events, there was jubilation greeting the returning army as it came back. And that stretched out throughout the summer into the fall of 1865. And we will be doing other events, I know at Fort Snelling later on, commemorating the return of the various regiments.
How long was it after the actual the day that people in Minnesota found out about this?
Well,
Nobody was tweeting, right?
no, it certainly took some time. And for much of Minnesota, they didn't have telegraph access either. You know, Minneapolis and St. Paul probably found out fairly quickly, but not the rest of Minnesota.
Representative, was there any kind of organized bell ringing 150 years ago, like you're planning this time around?
No, I don't, but not that I'm aware of, but certainly the bells were ringing in Minnesota in jubilation when communities found out, and that was their way of showing their joy.
Was there still animosity at that time toward the South from people in Minnesota when it ended?
Yes, I'm sure that there was. And it took a long time for some of the wounds to heal. And in some ways, you could say that in some instances, the wounds are still open from what happened in the Civil War 150 years ago. And certainly, if we include the U.S.-Dakota War of 1862 as part of that, and it is technically, the wounds are still open.
So that's what I'm asking then. Sure, there were parades of people coming home, but there was great bitterness. And
they didn't have, in the South, they weren't having parades.
Yeah. Well, parades here, I'm talking about
right.
People in Minnesota.
Yeah, and there were other connections, and then very shortly thereafter you have the death of Abraham Lincoln, as has been mentioned, and the remote connections of Minnesota to that. I've read about an instance in St. Joseph where there were those who reported on the late afternoon of April 14th that they'd heard Abraham Lincoln had been shot. Well, they were 6 hours early. And that opened up an investigation where the owner of the tavern in St. Joseph, who had heard this report, John Lindeman, was almost brought to trial for conspiracy because somehow he knew before it happened.
Amy, I'd like to follow up on any of the questions asked, please. Go ahead.
Just to add to that, we all look out the window and we see the state capitol under construction, and that building was built 20 plus years after the Civil War, and I think many of us probably don't know that pearl white exterior that we're restoring is Georgia limestone. And that capitol almost did not get built because it was Georgia limestone 20 years after the Civil War, when not unlike today, many legislators were Civil War veterans. So those feelings still ran deep 2+ decades after the war had ended.
Yeah, what will be happening specifically at the Capitol? Because many of us think of the Capitol as kind of a monument to the Civil War. Is there a connection specifically?
Ask him about the commemorations on April 9th.
Well, on April 9th, I mean, the idea, we're still working on it. We're going to start looking, we're looking at Fort Snelling in particular. I don't want to volunteer that necessarily with the DNR and the Historical Society, but with we have the bell of the chapel at Fort Snelling, and we also have the bell from the clock tower building that is now in the Visitor Center, I still believe, at the Historical Society. So, that seems like a natural place to do a bell ringing, so we're planning and looking at that right now. As to the attitude of, what was the attitude in the North? I believe it was Lincoln's second inaugural speech. He talked about with malice toward none, and really began trying to heal the wounds of the Civil War. To think, and when Grant and Lee actually met at Appomattox, they met as gentlemen and not as in a hostile way.
Any other questions on this topic? Anybody else have anything else to say?
I'll just, real quickly, I remember
And that was Thursday's press conference. Just want to remind you again that churches, temples, schools, city halls, public buildings, historic sites, and others throughout the state are invited to ring bells at precisely 2:15 Central Time in the afternoon on April 9th. The time and date marks a century and a half from when Union Lieutenant General Ulysses Grant met with Confederate General Robert E. Lee at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia to set the terms of surrender of Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. Bells across Minnesota are to toll for 4 minutes during the commemoration on April 9th, with each minute representing a year of war. The bells will sound at Appomattox 15 minutes ahead of the rest of the nation to coincide with the moment that the historic meeting between Grant and Lee had concluded. So that will be coming up on April 9th. And then also, I guess, if you want to organize a local bell ringing event, contact Eric Anderson at the Minnesota Historical Society. That will be Eric Anderson, E-R-I-K Anderson at mnhs.org, and then he'll be able to provide more information about it and get you in touch with the rest of what's going on throughout the state. Well, North Star Oasis, if you've been following us for any length of time, is a show that covers current events in our nation and community, along with the historical context. So sometimes we'll talk about politics, we'll talk about modern day things, sometimes we'll go back and talk about history, and then some days it gets all kind of tied together. And this is one of those episodes today that we're just trying to tie up some ends on the historical end with the modern historical context. So as we had just shown you the press conference on Thursday with the bell ringing across Minnesota, I do want to touch on one thing historically, and that's parades, because I'm an Iraq War veteran, and there's a lot of us from Iraq and Afghanistan campaigns who have not had the opportunity for our parade yet. So I wanted to go back briefly and recall, how about other conflicts? When did they get their parades? And World War II, a lot of parades happened right as soon as everybody came home. But then the Korean War veterans, they had their national parade on June 25th, 1991. Which was 2 weeks after the Persian Gulf veterans had theirs in June 10th of 1991. And then the Vietnam veterans had theirs May 7th of 1985. So for those of us in Iraq and Afghanistan, we haven't had our parade yet. We haven't had our homecoming. So tonight at the Fitzgerald Theater, you have a Civil War homecoming. Come on out to that stage presentation. But then for those of us who have been in uniform in the current conflict, we haven't really had our homecoming yet, but I know that day will be coming. But we're going to transition right now to another ending of sorts, and that would be the 70th anniversary of the ending of the Marine Corps in battle at Iwo Jima, the first of the Japanese home islands. And so we're just going to show you another very quick clip just to remind you of what happened with the combat actions on that island 70 years ago. And we had run a program back on February 20th episode where we had really highlighted the beginning of the campaign. Now we want to kind of put a capstone to the end of that 36-day campaign.
This is Staff Sergeant Alvin Josephi Jr., a United States Marine Corps combat correspondent speaking from Iwo Jima. An attack is underway, and so far this morning, in a couple of hours, they have gone approximately 500 yards through the most difficult kind of terrain. This island is studded with pillboxes, and they have already passed through several lanes of them and have passed over the volcanic ash, the terrible yellow, craggy, rocky, lifeless soil of this part of the island. Whoops, some bullets are whistling past us. We are in the open. Japanese mortars and also small arm fire are occasionally dropping around us. This is very near the front, and there is quite a bit of fire going on around here. The roar you hear in the background, our planes are coming from our own planes that are assisting the infantry just up ahead of us. It is a tremendously well-fortified island. I compare it to the Siegfried Line or one of those fortified lines in Europe, except that this is the entire island studded with such a line. Well, this is a moment at Iwo Jima. It is what the men are living under in their foxholes here. When you go to bed in your foxhole at night, you lie awake usually for hours listening to this. Now, this is Staff Sergeant Alvin Josephi Jr. concluding this broadcast from Iwo Jima.
Major General Graves Erskine, commanding general of the 3rd Marine Division, gave a famous quote after that battle. He said, "Victory was never in doubt, its cost was. What was in doubt in our minds was whether the last Marine would die knocking out the last Japanese gunner." So that was the Battle of Iwo Jima. Back in January and February, I'd given 2 presentations, one up at the in Becker at the Sherburne County Historical Society and one in the Afton Historical Society related to the Battle of Iwo Jima. And so it was a tremendous honor for me to actually give the presentation up in Becker in front of an Iwo Jima veteran. He was a medic with the 5th Amphibious Corps Medical Battalion. And here is just one little segment of an interaction between me and the Iwo veteran.
That sand is just about the same color as your shirt is there.
Mm-hmm.
That ain't no sand, it's black. Volcanic ash.
I got a question for you. Does that look familiar?
That's identical. That's what it is. I got a jar like that.
Yep.
That's what this.
You can go ahead and just pass this.
That's what the earth.
Do not open the lid. That is sand from Iwo Jima. Does anybody know? And if we can go to camera 1, here is the vial of sand from Iwo Jima. And as you saw that the Iwo vet recognized it right off the bat. He's got a jar like this at home. Here is sand from Iwo Jima. Also, if you notice at the end of that clip, I was about to show something else, and that is this. It's a set of field glasses, binoculars, that were they're Japanese, and this is what a Japanese soldier would have been looking at, looking over the beaches as the Marines were invading. He would have been looking through these. I had obtained these from an estate sale from a St. Paul sailor who had received them on the USS Sibley in exchange from a Marine who had come aboard at the end of the campaign, and he had bartered, and these are what he had received. And I've also brought one more artifact that I'm going to show you real quick, and that is actually a newspaper. This is from Red Wing, Minnesota, the Daily Republican Eagle. This is the original February 20th, 1945 edition. Yanks capture Maine Iwo Jima airfield. This is what people back here on the home front would have seen and how they would have gotten the news on the fact that the Marines had landed at Iwo. But now we're going to take another look at a presentation. I'm kind of merging both presentations into one on this one, and I'm going to be discussing the reclamation efforts of the Japanese to repatriate the remains of their own soldiers who had died defending Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima was returned to Japanese custody in 1968. The United States government was taking a look at our interests in the Pacific, which bases we felt were important, which ones we didn't feel we'd have use out of, and so they surrendered the island back over to the Japanese. Japan has an active search going on for their killed in action from that 1945 battle. It's still going on today. And then Dan King. And Dan just wrote a book called A Tomb called Iwo Jima. And he looks at the Japanese perspective of trying to document their side of that battle, and then the efforts that are undergoing to reclaim that battlefield from being a graveyard, taking the remains, exhuming the remains and shipping them back to Japan. So there is a small military presence, the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, the U.S. Navy carrier Air Wing 5, and which is comprised mainly of the USS George Washington right now, and the U.S. Coast Guard LORAN installation. I can't remember if it's a radar or if it's a satellite communications installation, but that's still operational on the island. Right now, the only way, if you are not associated with any of these three organizations, the only way you can actually get to Iwo Jima is by contacting Military Historical Tours and reserve your spot on the aircraft. They fly 2 aircraft out a year. They're actually flying out there next month, and the price is approximately $4,000 to take that tour. That does not include your airfare from Minneapolis, St. Paul to Guam. Now, at the time that I had given the presentation at Afton, February 19th, that was the beginning, the 70th anniversary of the beginning of the Iwo Jima campaign. There were Iwo Jima veterans who had gathered at the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Triangle, Virginia, right next to the Quantico Marine Corps installation. And this is a little clip that was about that particular event.
Well, it's always wonderful to get together with friends and brother Marines with whom you shared that awful experience. And I often say that if you make friends with somebody in a company picnic, or you meet them in a bar, you get friends, that's friendship. But the fact of life, the deepest relationships between friends when you share some adverse environment and survive it. And certainly Iwo Jima was an adverse environment. And for those of us who survived it, it's a brotherhood that you just are proud of, don't want to change it. Always glad to see each other. Always glad to find out how the families are doing and holding up. So it's an important element in bonding Marines, which I think is a hallmark of a Corps.
The Marines have a reputation of being one big fraternity. You meet a Marine anywhere that indicates that he was in the Corps or is in the Corps, and he's your friend for life.
Well, you get together, really, you want to remember those days, and you, not necessarily to talk about the events, but to talk about friends that you lost there. And we inevitably talk about those who survived and inquire whether they're well and how they're doing and all that, and hope we get a chance to see them again. So it's first about the personal relationships and bonds between Marine brothers that were built in that intensive war. But beyond that, we talk about world events. We hope that some of the lessons learned back in those days will apply today, and somehow we'll eventually get to the place where we don't have all this horrific war.
It's kind of unusual. Give us an opportunity and we'll talk about most anything else except what went on Iwo Jima. Most of us have tried to remove those things from our thinking because there are some very vivid experiences, very vivid occasions that we want to forget and can't. So most of us will carry on conversations about anything but. Occasionally, however, we will share with each other the things that went on, because there is a relationship between what happened to one individual or the other. And there is a camaraderie, there is a fellowship, a closeness between those two people that you don't find most anywhere else. So it's always a joy, really, to be around these individuals who, hadn't it for a miracle, they wouldn't even be here.
And they say, how come you survived? I said, I had 3 things protecting me on Iwo. And they say, what was that? And I said, it was luck, and luck. 3 times luck. Because you can tell you're getting shot at. You either hit where the sand would dance around you. And I'll tell you, that's the land of the dancing sand.
The Medal of Honor, I have said since I received it, that it belongs to them more than it belongs to me, because some of the Marines that I was with on Iwo Jima on the day that I did the action that resulted in the Medal of Honor, two of those Marines gave their lives protecting mine. So I consider the medal really belonging to them. I'm just a caretaker of it. They're just trusting me with it. So I wear it in their honor, not mine. Absolutely. If you're going to be a Marine, learn everything you can about what you are supposed to do and how you take care of your brother Marine, because he may be responsible for taking care of you.
Now in that clip, General Snowden, who was a captain back during Iwo Jima, he was captain of company. He was the commanding officer of Company F of the 23rd Marine Regiment, 4th Marine Division, when they were at Iwo Jima. He mentioned about going through with these guys in an adverse environment and surviving it, and how that you become a part of the brotherhood. And I'll tell you this: any combat veteran is that way. That as Herschel Woody Williams had mentioned, the Medal of Honor recipient, who had said that, one thing we don't talk about is Iwo. And combat veterans are that way. That we'll talk about our experiences to those who were there. And a lot of that comes because of the pain, the hurt, and the shared experience. That if you weren't there, you wouldn't understand. And that's, I think, what makes combat veterans special. And it is a special brotherhood. And I can completely identify with these gentlemen because my own experiences were similar to that. But also I have to mention that March 25th, this past week, was actually Medal of Honor Day. So this is, again, one of those times when we're all coming together, it's all coming together in a one package. That we've got a Medal of Honor recipient in Woody Williams, and he's representing it for everybody. Now let's take a look at what happened when they actually made it to the island as part of the reunion of honor.
Today is less about words describing the details of the battle or its strategic significance than it is about reflection. As a Marine, I'll begin by reflecting on what Iwo Jima means to our Corps. Over the past 70 years, the Battle of Iwo Jima has become part of the very ethos of the Marine Corps. For Marines, Iwo Jima is synonymous with extraordinary courage, will, and self-sacrifice. Marines who have carried the colors in combat since 1945 have been inspired by the spirit of Iwo Jima. And that spirit will continue to inspire Marines in every climb and place for generations to come. We also reflect on the thousands who risked their lives in the black sands and volcanic ash of Iwo Jima. And we pause to consider the profound sadness of hopes and dreams unfulfilled. We remember the sacrifice of the parents, the wives, and the children left behind. We reflect on the men who made it off this island, and we're particularly grateful for those who are with us today. We're thankful for the contributions they have since made in our Corps and as leaders in government, education, industry, and in their communities. The survivors of Iwo Jima and their example of service and resilience is also an important part of the battle's legacy. Finally, we reflect on the deep mutual respect of the American and Japanese people today. That respect and commitment to reconciliation brings us together in commemoration of an historic battle. Two nations who were once bitter enemies and are today the closest of friends, now bound by common values and a common cause. After joining you today in reflection, those of us still in uniform will depart Iwo Jima with renewed respect and gratitude for those who fought here. Those of us still in uniform will depart Iwo Jima with renewed commitment to our relationship with the Japanese people. And most importantly, in a few hours, we will depart Iwo Jima with renewed dedication to keep the spirit of Iwo Jima alive. Our commitment to those who fought here as the United States Marines will never forget your valor, your example, or your sacrifice. Thank you, and Semper Fidelis.
And if you notice the difference there between the earlier video that we had shown where everything was all black, there's no vegetation. And a lot of that was because, of course, when you have Army Air Corps and Navy bombardment for weeks on end, prior to the invasion force, there was nothing left. But I have heard from a couple of Iwo Jima veterans that after the Army had left, which had taken over for the Marine Corps 70 years ago this week. After the Army left, that they had actually replanted seeds all throughout the island. And now we're seeing the results of that, as it's actually a pretty lush island today. Now, what happened after the reunion of honor, and what did the veterans themselves have to say about being back there after 70 years? Let's find out.
Service and sacrifice for one another.
We are former enemies, and now we're friends. And the transition from being enemies to being friends has taken time for some. But the life, the widow of Lieutenant General Kurobayashi, who commanded the forces here when we landed, expressed it very succinctly for us in 1995 when she said, former enemies, now friends. And together, we must not let this type of warfare happen again.
Just recently, General Snowden read an article out of my book, which is very significant of what I'm going to do when I go to Iwo Jima, the island. I am going to make an attempt to honor the Japanese and shake their hand. Up to then, when he read that article in my book, I was very upset about even attempting to do anything like that.
I came in 2010 for the 65th anniversary, but this is the first time, maybe the last time, that I'll be on Iwo Jima. It's a long trip. I'm 91 years old. I don't know how much time I have left, but it's just it's a day of memories for me. Great memories and sad memories. But I have, in 1988, my youngest son married the daughter of a Japanese kamikaze pilot, which took me from hatred to love of family. I have 3 Japanese grandchildren. I'd like their contemporaries to know that my grandchildren's grandparents served their countries with honor, no matter what we learned about the Japanese or what they learned about us, that war is an atrocity, that evil has to be wiped out. And we are not what we believe. We are all human beings, exactly the same. And there's evil in the world today, and we have to fight that evil to make sure that there's freedom for free-loving people in our world. And you guys in the Marines, and Navy, Air Force, are the ones with that responsibility. And I know you fulfill it well.
I'm PFC James Skinner, August 28, 1942, November 9th, 1945, and I'm a Purple Heart veteran, got wounded on Guam. And Thank you.
My name is Donald R. Farnham, Farnham. I was a private first class in the Marine Corps from 1943 to 1945.
Ed Graham in World War II, 3rd Marine Division, 3rd Engineer Battalion.
Well, I am Lawrence F. Snowden, S-N-O-W-D-E-N, Lieutenant General, United States Marine Corps, retired. I served in World War II, in Korea and Vietnam.
My name is Jerry Yellen, and I served in World War II, one of 16 million who served their nation then.
And I guess today we're going to leave you with a quote about reconciliation. Reconciliation heals the soul, the joy of rebuilding broken relationships and hearts. If it's healthy for your growth, forgive and love. 70 years after one of the most momentous battles of the entire World War II campaign, we're seeing the veterans and the families of both sides come together and let go of their past. They're seeking forgiveness, they're seeking the healing that it takes in order to understand what happened, to accept what happened, and to live a more prosperous future. And I'm saying prosperous, not monetary, but just prosperous with peace of mind. And that's the one thing about, war. When you go through a lot of adversity, as General Snowden mentioned, it can really mess you up inside. I know a lot of veterans are out there hurting. We've brought on the show before the statistic of 22 veterans per day commit suicide. But the thing about peace and forgiveness, a lot of that is a state of mind. A lot of that comes from within. And when your whole world has been rocked and you're dealing with the psyche and the psychological issues that come with having something as violent as war rip through, your head and your heart, it takes a lot. It takes a lot to rip open that scar. It takes a lot to get back to a sense of balance and normalcy. But that's, I think, one of the reasons why we take the time to remember the events that happened so long ago. That's why we look back at the Civil War. Keep in mind, and Eric Jacobson, who will actually be at tonight's show, made a statement when I visited with him in Franklin, Tennessee back in November. He said that the World War II generation is often called the greatest generation, but he actually believes that the greatest generation was the Civil War generation, because these are the guys who came home and rebuilt their community, their families. They're the ones who contributed so much to the growth of this country, and that's one of the reasons why it's important to remember them. On par with that would be, or just below that would be the currently known as greatest generation, because these guys did the same thing. They came home and they did the best to put the war behind them and to build this country. And I think that's why today we remember the war and the aftermath. But that's it for this week. North Star Oasis. Check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at North Star Oasis. And we will see you next week.